us to using sound as a tool in technology. Sound creates light. It's very obvious. We know that God said, let there be light, and you can do this yourself by attaching a speaker to an LED light and see what happens. The Ankh was used as a healing tool. We know that from images like this, and there's a lot more to be said about this. The medicine wheel is a cross in a circle that represents sound, that primordial source of sound. It shows that the Native American healers knew that sound could cure and could heal. This is a Sumerian seal that represents sound, and also this is where the swastika has its origin, in sound and resonance. The Ark of the Covenant was obviously a very powerful sound energy generating device. It was also a communication device that Moses could communicate with God and with his people when he sat on the mercy seat below the angels and their wings, and was also a very powerful device that brought down the walls of Jericho, because obviously it gave off some sort of a low frequency vibration, and then with a blast from a trumpet and a shout, the walls came tumbling down. So either an electromagnetic pulse or something of that kind that brought the walls of Jericho down. Royal Raymond Rife, you should know by now, that cured the man that found the cure for all disease with sound and resonance. They were converted to electric impulses. And right here in Sedona, in a library in Sedona, is his handwritten manuscript that you can read all his handwritten frequencies that he wrote down for cures for all the disease. All the different cancers. This is for diphtheria. This is for tuberculosis. And so it goes. Lakovsky, the multiple wave oscillator, that has got an incredible record of curing all kinds of diseases, including cancers. And more recently, Anthony Holland, who in a TED talk in 2011 shows how he cures cancer with sound frequencies. Unfortunately, Anthony Holland thought he'd become famous. And since then, we've not heard anything of him. He sort of disappeared. He didn't realize that the sound healing of cancer was discovered long before him, because he mentions it as a new phenomenon.
These are the first videos taken. We showed these videos to our friends in the biology department. They said they hadn't seen anything quite like it. Seems to be a new phenomenon. These organisms are being shattered by our electronic signals. This is a harmless organism, almost friendly, a little Blepharisma. And normally they're very fast swimmers, but when you approach a frequency to which they are vulnerable, they begin to slow down, then they stop, and then they begin to disintegrate within about 3 minutes. So first we attack pancreatic cancer. Take a good look at this slide, because the next one will look quite different. After we treat these cells, they change their shape and size, and they begin to grow long, rope-like structures out the sides. They look something like antennas. I call them bioantennas for biological antennas. It's as if the cancer cells are trying to tune into our signal. We now know that cancer is vulnerable between the frequencies of 100,000 hertz and 300,000 hertz. So now we attack leukemia cells. Leukemia cell number 1 tries to grow a copy of itself, but the new cell is shattered into dozens of fragments and scattered across the slide. Leukemia cell number 2 then hyperinflates and also dies. Leukemia cell number 3 then tries to make another cancer cell. The new cell is shattered and the original cell dies.
I think you get the gist of it. Sound continues to amaze us. Sound can levitate. By now, you would have seen this many times. Just a very quick idea that sound actually does levitate things. But this is not how the ancients used to levitate the very big, heavy objects. This is a very different technique used here. This is just pressure waves that can levitate things, very light object, but it does give you the ability to imagine that sound actually levitates. John Keeley levitated stuff and drilled sound holes with sound in 1888 already. Peter Davy boiled water with sound since 1940, and he died several years ago. Sound creates what's known as a star in a jar, called sonoluminescence. When you take a sphere of water and you expose it to certain frequencies, it gives off a very, very bright light at the center of the water, called a star in a jar, which is just absolutely not quite what it is. Magnetrons are really just very, very, it's called a resonant cavity magnetron that is created through resonance, sound resonance. It creates huge amounts of energy that's used in laser beams, used in microwaves, laser beams, etc. Sound acts as a cloak of invisibility. Sound can make things disappear. This 3D sort of plastic pyramid they created, when they expose it to certain sound frequencies, anything they put underneath it disappears, becomes invisible. And then makes you wonder if that was the original idea for the structures of some monasteries. What do monks do in monasteries? They sit and chant. And I've heard from many people that do a lot of chanting and monastery kind of work, whatever that may mean, that at times when they're in a group and they're chanting, they look up and some people, God, they're not there. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I've heard that from many people. They claim that people simply disappear when they get into a deep state of meditation and toning. And sound creates hurricanes. There are two guys in 2003 that lodged a patent to create hurricanes out of sound, believe it or not. And I believe they were granted their patent to create hurricanes. And maybe this is how they create the weather for us, without us even realizing it. And creates superclusters, galaxies, supercluster galaxies. This is from NASA, from 2003. They say that they found a supercluster that was resonating 57 octaves lower than middle C, and it is in a key of B flat. I find it interesting. Because B flat is just a semitone up from A. And if A is the first frequency or the source code of creation, and B flat is just a semitone up from that. This is just how my mind works, right? So it's very interesting. So is that like the first basic level of creation, up one level from the creative source code itself that becomes visible to us? Who knows? This is what it looks like. These are images that they show us of this galaxy, and it looks just like the cymatic patterns from Hans Jenny's the lycopodium powder, creating shapes and mountains. There you go. Doesn't it look just like that? And just realize that this is how things are created. These are the sound waves that they show us of this galaxy. And if you look at it very carefully, it's a very specific toroidal shape, toroidal pattern. And this is a fantastic one. These kids from college here in the USA that created a sound fire extinguisher. And this is years ago. You would have thought by now the fire brigades would be using it everywhere.
We're both graduating from the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at George Mason University this coming May. We're just going to test out our device that we use that uses sound frequencies to extinguish flames.
I see this device being applied to a lot of things. First off, I think in the kitchen, it could be on top of a stovetop. But eventually, I'd like to see this applied to maybe swarm robotics, where it'd be attached to a drone, and that would be applied to forest fires or even building fires, where you wouldn't want to sacrifice human life.
Professor Brian Mark really stepped in to help us.
Just gave us a lot of support.
I think as a whole, engineering is really just finding solutions finding simple solutions to complicated problems. Engineering is all about finding a way to make the impossible possible, so that's what we do.
I mean, you'd expect that to be picked up by the fire brigades, wouldn't you? No way, they're not going to do that. Imagine a big building on fire, just pull up a couple of fire trucks, blast it with sound, and fire's out. That's too easy, can't do that. We need people to get injured and hurt so we can get insurance claims, we can have hospitals to work, we get the drug companies, everything's got to work. We got to get the corporate thing to function. We can't just solve the problem, it's not going to work for us. Right? Sound creates volcanoes. Imagine, the earth is ringing like a bell all the time. So these frequencies keep coming out of the earth all the time. What do you think creates the volcanoes? What creates the heat underground that creates the volcanoes?
More like a bubbling.
Heat is just an expression of frequency, right? Actually, that we perceive as heat.
Is that sound is actually three-dimensional. We've come accustomed to seeing graphs like this. This depicts sound waves as moving in a two-dimensional pattern. Or here, like a sine wave, which does help us mathematically, but is not a realistic depiction of sound. This would be a more realistic depiction, showing interference from all angles.
And this is what happens when you crank it up.
High intensity, we can do something sort of like this.
There's your little volcano.
Instead of simply increasing intensity to get...
Sound energizes the air that we breathe, and that's actually one of the most exciting discoveries that I've made, is because as you breathe in the air, it always puzzled me, what happens to the oxygen that you breathe in? Why is it that we breathe the oxygen in and then we use some part of it and then we breathe the oxygen out? What happens? What happens in that process? We don't use the oxygen up. If we did, we'd be in big trouble because there'd be no bloody oxygen left, right? But so we breathe the oxygen in and then you breathe the oxygen out. So what part of the oxygen do you actually use? Well, it's the energized part of the oxygen. And what energizes the oxygen is actually the way that you breathe it in. It's the sound of the air that you breathe. Put your hand to your mouth, like this, your hand to your ear, and listen. You make a lot of noise when you breathe, but you can't really hear it. And it's that sound of the air as you breathe. As it goes into your lungs, it speeds up all the time. So it's the sound of the air, and it's speeding up, because it's getting into thinner and thinner capillaries all the time. So by the time the air reaches the alveoli in your lungs, it's probably moving faster than the speed of light, and it's just full of energy. And it's the sound of that, the energy of that sound that energizes the oxygen. It goes into your bloodstream, and the energy of that oxygen is stripped, and then the stripped oxygen is released back into the air. Luc Montagnier, 2011, spontaneously generated DNA in water with sound frequencies. If you go on YouTube, you can watch one of these latest documentaries where he creates a virus with a sound frequency from Paris to Rome by sending a sound frequency of a virus across a telephone line, and they reconstitute the virus that he has in the lab in Paris. They reconstitute the same virus in the lab in Rome. This is just spectacular stuff, right? So now you can see how we can manifest things. We become creators and can manifest anything with sound. And this is why we now know that sound is the ultimate source of free energy. And Nikola Tesla knew this. He knew that the earth rings like a bell, and he used the sound of the earth because it constantly rings. It never stops. He used it as a source of energy to create his free energy device. And this is where we realize that sound and magneticism is inextricably connected. It's sound that creates magnetic fields, and moving magnetic fields create electricity. It's in that order that creation seems to happen. So we don't live in an electromagnetic universe, we live in a magneto-electric universe. And please watch the DVDs and the videos online about the electric universe. That is spectacular research that tell us what the sun is, what the stars are, and how things actually function. So magnets give off sound. We all know what speakers are. So there you go. You got electricity. It comes out of a plug. It runs down a wire. It goes into a speaker, a magnet. The magnet reacts, and the magnet makes the air move and creates sound. And the reverse is possible as well. It works one way and it works the other way. And this is where we start getting into the real understanding of some of the masters. And no matter how I look at it, how much research I do, I keep coming back to one guy that stands head and shoulders above all other researchers and inventors of, I don't know, for how many centuries. And that guy's name is Nikola Tesla. By now, if you don't know him yet, I suggest you go and do some research into this guy's work. He says, if you want to find out the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That's exactly what I've been sharing with you here.